What we're trying to do with the mental toughness concept and the measure is make the invisible visible. And if you think about that, it identifies at least 40,000 variations of profile. This is digging much deeper than typing or labeling approaches. In fact, I would argue that in due course, we should stop using typing instruments. We're not one of 4 types. We're not one of 16 types. We're one of millions of types. And if we really want to understand the people that we're working with, we need to understand what's unique about them. So the mental toughness concept is addressing nuance. It enables real customization. But it also does something else. It begins to challenge unidimensional thinking, because when we talk about mental toughness and mental sensitivity, these are 2 points on a scale. We're not talking about mental strength or mental weakness. We're not talking about good or bad. It is perfectly possible for a mentally sensitive individual to thrive and be extremely successful. It's also possible for a mentally tough person to struggle and fail. So what we're moving away from is much more nuanced thinking. We're avoiding talking about good and bad. I'll sharpen that as an example. If you look at, say, the growth mindset idea, when you look at LinkedIn and popular descriptions of growth and fixed mindset, will often paint those as growth mindset is good, fixed mindset is bad. That's not the case. What we should understand is what are the components of growth mindset and what are the components of fixed mindset. And we'll see that not all of them are necessarily good and not all of them are necessarily bad. It depends very much on the situation and the application. So there are a couple of areas where we're beginning to bring some challenging thinking. So when I talk about a data-based approach to employee development, what do I mean? Well, for a true data-based approach, you need a concept that has real science behind it. So I think we can tick that box. It should measure something that impacts on key outcomes. Well, the research confirms that the mental toughness, your mental toughness profile, impacts on just about every outcome that matters for you. It should enable us to diagnose needs around mental toughness and behaviour, which you can do. But importantly, if we're going to have a data-based approach, we need to be able to analyse that data, link it to desired outcomes, but also analyse it in a way that we can get to what the data is trying to tell us. Now, I'll give you an example right now about how much this is going, how far this is going. We are in the middle of a pilot project with an organisation employing 14,000 people in several countries and several locations around the world. And they are going to test every single employee. That's quite a bold thing to do, but what they're interested in is, yes, can I help the employee? Can I create self-awareness amongst employees? But I also want to know about the patterns of mental toughness across my organisation. So can I analyse it by location? Because I want to understand which locations have performing better and which are more mentally tough or more mentally sensitive, and particularly what are their patterns of mental toughness and mental sensitivity. I want to understand whether there's an age issue, whether young people are responding differently to the challenges of the organisation to more mature. Is there a level of the organisation issue? Once we've got data and we've got reliable data and the normative measure can bring that data to us, we can do a phenomenal amount with that data. And the next step is to speak to a government of a whole country to be able to do that for directing social and economic policy. But that then allows us to target interventions based on data. So it allows us to move away from one-size-fits-all approaches. So if we have an issue in one location, we direct attention to one location. We don't put everybody through the program. If there are particular groups of people who are needing support, we provide support to those on a need basis. We don't give it to everybody. What about a systemic approach? Well, if we look at, say, the interplay between leadership development, culture, team working, and employee development, mental toughness, because it's fundamental, is relevant for all four. In other words, it's the one concept that can link all four. Now, we commonly have seen organizations over the years introduce a program for individuals, a program for team working, but the two don't connect. And then they announce a cultural initiative, which again doesn't connect. What we can do here is at least connect around a really fundamentally important idea. So when we talk about leadership development, we know that there are basically two major core leadership behaviors. There's one is about having purpose, about stretching. The other one is about engaging with people to be able to deliver those stretching goals or that key purpose. Mental toughness matters. Mental toughness is the mental toughness profile of the leadership group and of individual leaders determines how successful that is. But leadership has also got a big impact on culture. And we will very often describe mental toughness for the people who don't like the term mental toughness as it's a combination of resilience and positivity. Resilience is important, but it's not enough. Resilience helps you to pick yourself up, dust yourself off and keep on going, but it won't necessarily make you look forward to the future. Positivity is what helps you to deal with what lies ahead. So mental toughness and positivity come together. Resilience and positivity come together as mental toughness. I don't know of an organization that doesn't have resilience and positivity as core elements of its culture. So mental toughness in terms of individual development, that's pretty much a no-brainer. Mental toughness in terms of team working, that is also really fundamentally important. The concept works with everybody. The mentally sensitive and the mentally tough. Now, it might surprise you that in our work, we tend to do more work with the mentally tough, helping them to understand why they struggle and fail, than we do with the mentally sensitive. It matters for both. The concept is non-judgmental. Your profile describes who you are. This can bring advantage and disadvantage depending on the situation. I'm going to give you a little example. For just over 10 years, I've been working with a concert pianist. 10 years ago, she was studying at the Scottish Academy of Music, the Glasgow Conservatoire, which is one of the main places in the world to study music. And she got in touch with me because although she could play the piano and could play wonderfully well, she suffered from stage fright. So she asked, would understanding mental toughness help me in any way? So we completed the mental toughness questionnaire. At that time, we only had the NTQ48, but we used the NTQ48. And we found that she was actually mentally tough on virtually every one of the factors, except for confidence and abilities. She scored STEM 2. And we explored that in discussion. We explored what that meant. And what we found was that she would sit on the stage and she would imagine that everybody in the audience was being hypercritical. They would spot every little mistake she made. If she missed a note, they would spot that. If she got a phrasing wrong, she would spot that. And that was actually the case. But there was an upside to it because that was also a source of her drive. She would work hard to try to eliminate the prospect of making a mistake. So if we try to eliminate or do something about her competence and abilities, improve them, we run the risk of removing a component of her drive. So we decided to leave that alone. After some discussion, it was her decision. And what we did was we taught her to imagine, in other words, to be an actor, to act for, say, the 90 minutes she was on stage. She would be somebody else. She would be somebody who did have confidence in her abilities. We couldn't persuade her to do that 24 hours a day. That would just wear her out. But she could tune her mind to being able to do that. 10 years on, or more, just a little over 10 years on, she's an extremely successful concert pianist, playing all over Europe and North America. She's just made a film in Canada, hugely successful. Over the years, we have assessed her mental toughness profile 4 times. Most recently, at the end of last year, her confidence and ability score is still STEM 2. That's illustrating this is not about labeling people. It's not about saying you're strong or you're weak. This is about understanding who you are, understanding how you are approaching things mentally and what that means. And from that, we can work out a solution that works for you. So self-awareness is key. And for some people, it's enough, but it's the client who chooses to change or not. But what that means is, if we're not judgmental, we can help everybody to be the best version of ourselves or themselves that they can be. So it's got a huge application in coaching and mentoring. I'm only mentioning coaching and mentoring because globally, that is probably the biggest group of people who use and practice using the mental toughness concept. But they're fast being overtaken by trainers and consultants. So why is that? Well, sorry, I need to touch upon this. Not everybody needs to change. Self-awareness improves engagement. Some people can change if it's right for them. Some people won't. They can learn how to deal with those times when it doesn't work for them. But it does enable us to customize development for the individual. And from an organisational perspective, one-size-fits-all programs are horrendously expensive and they deliver very little. But by focusing on real need and on actual need, you stand a much better chance of getting much better results for much less outlay. And we now have organisations that demonstrate this. It's the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. Now, they faced a big challenge last year because there's a general election and there was a prospect of a major change in the government. In other words, lots of sitting MPs were going to lose their jobs and an awful lot of new MPs were going to come into position. Now, that had to be handled in a very short space of time. And that's the role of the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. And the way they adopted it, they approached it, is they said, right, we've got to develop resilience. We've got to make sure that we're really ready to deal with any setbacks, any issues that arise, and not be blocked in our progress. But we've also got to be positive and optimistic. We've got to believe we can deal with this. And they tested everybody from top to bottom. And of course, the organisation was also structured in departments or large teams. And they looked at each department and each team. But the cascade was from top down. And that was the crucial thing. If you try to do something with teams in an organisation, and there's either not commitment or not involvement of the people at the top, then people further down the organisation are cynical about what they're being asked to do. But in this case, there was complete commitment from the people at the top of the organisation. So yes, there were still people who resisted, who were suspicious about what was going on, but 95+% of the staff collaborated and participated because the senior leadership participated. And the senior leadership were actually prepared to share their profiles. So they were able to demonstrate that, yeah, this is me, this is why I respond the way I do. And there's an element of boldness, an element of courage about that. Now, you're not always going to get that. I accept that. But what I could see in this particular case was, if the people at the top were doing this and telling everybody about who they were and what they were, maybe there's nothing to fear. And they got everybody participating. And the outcome was, and there is a case study, a written up case study coming for this, is that they achieved the goal of making sure that everybody and their entourage, and we're talking about thousands of people who lost their seats, were processed, and all the new people with their entourage were brought on board, all in the space of 4 weeks. It was a massive challenge for an organisation that doesn't have to do anything like this day by day. And it actually came in several £1 million within budget. So I don't know to what extent that answers your question, but I think to make something like this work, it has to be driven from the top. It has to be, the people at the top have got to be the exemplars for what's going on.
So can you tell us about any research you've got or your personal experience with those who might be skewed more towards the right of the STEM scale, in terms of finding new roles quicker, or being more aspirational or anything along those lines?
Right. Okay. So when we're talking about transition, there is a lot of research, published research on transition between jobs. There's been a lot of work on transition from university into work, and a lot of work on transition from high school to university, and they all matter. So just touching upon because one of the big areas, one of the fastest growing areas for us at the moment is this notion of transition from high school to university. Generally, dropout rates on university programs and college programs in Europe run around 16%. In other words, 16% of students who enroll on an undergraduate program drop out typically within the first term, within the first 10 weeks. Now, depending on how universities are funded, that is an enormous waste of time and money, huge. And yet we know from probably about half a dozen programs that we've run and some research studies that the people who drop out of university problems tend to be more mentally sensitive than mentally tough. And what's happening there is the shock of working in a completely new environment is uncomfortable, and it takes them time to kind of adjust to the new environment. But of course, if you're on a degree program, by the time you've kind of adjusted to your new environment, you can be 5 weeks behind on your course, so you drop out. So what we've been able to do is to show that in general, you can halve that dropout rate. Now, the economics of that are phenomenal. I mean, really, really phenomenal. You can save universities and funders a fortune by simply assessing students when they are joining a university and directing pastoral care support to them. And the interesting thing is that pastoral care is generally sitting in a university or a college, but they rely upon people knocking on their door. What this is doing is creating a more proactive approach. In terms of transition to work, we find exactly the same. The more mentally tough, there is actually a really interesting study that was carried out in Scotland by the Scottish Funding Council who wanted to understand this. And what we found was that the more mentally tough tended to get a job more quickly, and they tended to get better paid jobs than the mentally sensitive. And there is actually a piece of research from the from Queen's University that shows exactly the same. But the interesting thing about that was the Scottish study then followed the students into the workplace, and they found something else that was interesting. They found that the more mentally tough students got going into their job more quickly than did the mentally sensitive. The mentally sensitive could take quite a bit of time to adjust to the new situation. And in terms of changing jobs or redundancy, or whether it's through redundancy or through just wanting to change job. Exactly the same applies. The more mentally tough move from one situation to the other more comfortably and more quickly than do the mentally sensitive.
I know that you work with very senior leaders and people in management roles and whatnot. Paul's very familiar. I work with a lot of sub-executives, so candidates in their first, second, third roles, so maybe up to about the age of 30. And I just wanted to gain your view on what you feel is happening in that age bracket with regards to their resilience and mental toughness, because I know from our perspective, something we deal with on a day-to-day basis is I work in the world of recruitment, and employers simply saying we cannot find strong, independent, mentally tough young people, full stop. Like, they are so worried about their capability to arrive at work and actually perform the base duties of a job that the thought of moving them into a leadership role is just so far from the playing field. But the problem is, on the other side, the candidates want leadership roles and they want them at a young age, but there's just a massive disconnect. And so I'm doing a lot of work with a lot of young people to try and bridge that gap, but it is very, very challenging. And I just wanted to gain your view on what you think is happening with those younger people. And it's definitely a knock-on from COVID.
Yeah, well, there is probably a COVID effect, because I know from my own grandchildren who have gone through the tail end of high school and university through COVID, because they got this sort of virtual learning, everything was done virtually. They didn't get any of the other developments that you would expect at university. When I went to university, the thing I got most out of university was my personal development, learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, and so on. So I think that's missing for a lot of people. But I think there are other factors, like when I went to university, this is telling you how old I am, I'm ancient. About only 4% of the population in the UK went to university, and hardly any of them were women. Now it's more than 50%. So 96% of the population didn't have an expectation about their careers. They would go and work in a factory or work in an office and climb the ladder or whatever. Now you've got people who have got different expectations. They've been shown a world, at least in terms of in academic terms or in knowledge terms, that nobody would have seen in the past. So their expectations are different. Whether they are being shown how to optimize that, I think that's the big challenge, is another thing. I think that there's insufficient personal development going on for young people, and we're seeing that everywhere. And I think that's the big challenge. So you're at the tail end of it. You're having to deal with people who've gone through this process that was supposed to educate them, but has actually given them a qualification and precious little understanding of how to deal with life.
Absolutely. And they want to work at home, yet they also want to work at home, but they want a team, they want leadership, they want more money, they want to grow, they want all of these things. But of course, on the flip side, it's about what they're prepared to give in order to achieve those things, and there's a disconnect there.